Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we've just been to see Rose of Nevada
Yes.
at the Mockingbird. This is written and directed and edited and composed and all the things by Mark Jenkin, who
is no Orson Welles.
We previously saw Bait. All right. We previously saw Bait, which was, I think, his first feature film. He's from Cornwall, and I don't think we're told this is set in Cornwall, but it is. Bait certainly was. Yeah. Ennis Men, I think, which he made in between, which we didn't see, also Cornish. So he has his place that he's interested in, his culture that he's interested in.
Yes.
He also has a camera that he's interested in, this Bolex camera, which is clockwork, silent, so all the sound, including dialogue in his films, is post-synchronized, put on afterwards.
Is that the case with this film?
I believe so. I think he's still using that camera.
Okay.
There may be bits and pieces where he uses different cameras, but it was a big part of the appeal of the first one that he was using this interesting, restored old camera. I think he's still doing that. This is still 60mm. It's not black and white, as Bait was. So this has much more of a kind of Super 16 feel. That it has a kind of sunbursts at times. He's very interested as a visual stylist in the tactility of the image and the issues that can come from shooting on film. And I think it's either this film or Ennis Men, maybe both, where when the film was transferred to 4K at a lab, they were instructed not to clean up the film, not to remove dust and things, which they would normally
I'm
do.
sure that would have been the case with this one
I
as well.
expect so, yeah. Which is not to say, I mean, there are times when, certainly the first few shots of the film, it's really playing on the imagery of scratches.
Texture. I love... It's what I liked best about the film, actually.
But for the most part, it does subdue that. So it's not a visual kind of... It's not visually chaotic in the way that it might be if it were doing that the whole way through. This is a film about a Cornish town. It's a fishing town, but everything's basically dead, right? There's a food bank, no one's got any work, no one's doing anything, and this old boat turns up, this old fishing vessel, which we learn went missing 30 years ago, back in 1993. A businessman sees it again, this businessman who used to run this boat, and immediately he thinks, well, I want to start making some more money with it, it's back. The idea is that it went missing because it had a crew of 3, had the captain and 2 young fishermen who worked on it. And one of those fishermen didn't join the crew one day. They were short-handed. They couldn't cope with whatever it was, probably a storm. They died. Or they were lost, at least. And the fisherman who didn't go with them felt such shame that he threw himself from a cliff. So, you have this kind of past, this history of loss that we're told about. It's a loss both of that vessel and the people on it, and also the loss of the industry that it's just very tactile. The businessman hires a new crew, basically. The ship seems to come with a captain who looks suspiciously like the
old captain
that used to run it. And he does kind of have a sort of Davy Jones sort of like man of the sea sort of mystical quality about him, I suppose, as the film goes on. They hire 2 new young fishermen. They go out for a fishing expedition for a few days, and when they come back, it seems that the world has been transported back to 1993, and everyone in this town, which is now bustling, it's alive, the pub is busy, what used to be, or will become in the future, the food bank is a post office that's working, so the world is completely different, and everyone in this town, 30 years younger, appears to believe that these 2 young fishermen are the original 2 young fishermen who went missing. One went missing, one killed himself. So it has a time travel aspect, or time loop aspect, or something along those lines, which normally really appeals to me. I think I found it lacking here. I think I found a lot of things lacking here.
Yes, I did as well. I mean, to be blunt, I am completely gobsmacked by the reviews that this film has been getting. I've only kind of seen a few, but The Guardian, Sight and Sound, because it has 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and I actually think that is so misjudged and misguided. There's a lot to admire in this film. I love what you described as the opening shots, the way that the film abstracts textures, makes something beautiful, about through rust and rot and wood, it kind of, it's, to me, the film is the work of a very considerable visual artist, but not a storyteller, right? And there were things that I think are absolutely amateurish, really, in the film. He's terrible with actors, right? Everyone, except for Callum Turner, everyone is tilted or poncy or kind of poetically kind of declamatory. They don't feel real at all. Yeah, it has that kind of, stilted feel. And, the basic narrative only became clear to me after I read the review.
Right, okay.
This whole thing about the ship appearing, well, I thought the ship was just there, really, And I thought, yes, people are comparing it to something from the past, but it feels quite vague, and then when the guy wakes up and, realizes at some point that he's in 1993 instead of his present, I thought, okay, well, we're in that kind of movie.
Yeah. In terms of like being kind of specific about things, I think the film does take its time to do that. It is kind of indicating to you early on, this businessman comes across this boat right at the start and investigates it, and something's going on. He recognises things about it, and then the film, I think it cuts to black at the end of that opening scene, and he says, "You're back." So that's it telling you, in some sense, that this is a returned vessel. But in terms of the details of this was 30 years ago, the guy killed himself, that sort of thing, it's not fuzzy, but the film isn't going overboard on giving you all that information, and it's possible to miss it. Possible to miss it. It's possible to miss it probably in the accents and in the dialogue.
I missed it because when he says the ship is back, okay, well, it's back from the sea. I actually, I didn't make those connections, and in fact, I suspect that a lot of the reviewers making those connections are making the connections out of the publicity package for the film.
Which tells you what's going on. Because I think you're right. If you come into this as blind as you did, because I had read at least the blurb on the Mockingbird website that said there's 30 years worth of time travel in this. If you come to it as blind as you did, I can see you getting lost in understanding that that's what's supposed to be going on.
And I didn't mind to a certain extent, because I do think that the film is beautiful to look at. It felt to me at times like an experimental film, right? And actually, some of the stiltedness of the situations and the acting, I thought, kind of that's interesting, because it reminded me a little bit of Derek Jarman's also kind of, more experimental narratives. Except, that I think Jarman is experimental, whereas I think this one is trying to tell you a story, and I think it tells it very badly, really, and I think it tells it without the audience in mind. Kind of storytellers have an audience in mind. Here's a joke, right, to kind of lessen the tension, or here's something kind of to increase the tension, or kind of how do these story points land, how will the story understand, if they don't understand this, will they feel that later? I don't think there's any kind of that kind of, if that kind of thinking has been done, it hasn't been successfully done.
It didn't pay off for you at the very least.
Yes.
And I kind of thought, what you essentially get with these two youngsters once they realise they are back in the past is one of them is very happy to accept his new lot in life. So this woman believes, or I suppose he might actually be, her partner, and they have a young kid together, and he's very happy to jump into that role and assume that now I'm daddy, now I'm a husband and stuff. Because I think he seems to come from pretty much nowhere.
Well, actually, my feeling, and I could be wrong, but my impression of our introduction to the Callum Turner character is that he's kind of homeless, or he's sleeping rough, or
he did seem to be.
And
And and he doesn't seem to have like anything to kind of latch onto. In fact, I don't think he's even from there, because at one point he says to the other character, the George Mackay character, "I thought you people were natural fishermen." She said, yes, he's not even from there. No. So he's really just a wild card kind of out of nowhere. He's happy to just bed in to the past, into this role. Whereas George Mackay's character, we see at the start, he has a partner, he has a kid, he has a house, he's fixing the roof, he has responsibilities and people who rely on him and who he loves, and he wants to get back to them as soon as he possibly can. He wants to work out how to leave this time, because they're not there 30 years ago.
To be maybe a bit controversial again, I thought Mackay was terrible.
I didn't like him very much. So what you're saying about stiltedness occurred to me as well, and to me it was reminiscent of like Russian cinema from the 20s. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in it which is a shot of a face. The face turns slightly and looks at something else. You see what it's looking at, cuts back. There's a lot of Kuleshov effect type stuff. The faces aren't doing very much. You're supposed to be getting these effects out of the editing, but it's really stiff. I wonder whether there is some element of a deliberate effect the filmmaker's going for, but it does come across as unsophisticated, I suppose, or none too subtle.
I mean, there's a lot. So on the one hand, there are very, very beautiful things, as I said. Like that abstraction of textures. I wonder if he's done some work. Like when I used to teach in Cuba at the film school, they had these courses on garnering different effects with different degrees, different methods of developing the celluloid. Yeah, so kind of, some kind of work on the aesthetics, but through the development process. And actually the film, to me, evoked a little bit of what they used to do there. So, there might be a little bit of that. And I loved all of that. So there were things that, to me, felt really amateurish, right? So I love that aspect of it. But, some of the things with the sound work, right? Particularly when this phrase gets repeated and it's in this mechanical kind of, I thought was...
Sounds like a bad tape recording coming back.
Exactly.
It's supposed to be... Yeah, I mean, again, it's clearly very deliberate. There's not an accident that the sound sounds like that and it's being used like that, but what the intended effect is supposed to be, I'm not sure, and it felt lost on me. It didn't generate an emotional effect on me that I understood.
Yeah, to me it felt kind of amateurish. Also, he's credited with being everything. Director, cinematographer, composer, whatever. I thought the music wasn't very good. I thought it was kind of monotonous and of a certain kind. And I think when we looked at Bait, I argued that, the film had a conservative kind of ethos, right? And I think you see that in this as well. Yeah, both in a kind of a nostalgia for past technologies, right? That you see both in their uses in the film, but also in their representations, the tape recorder, the old tools, all those kinds of things. But also in this inability to conceive of a fully rounded life in the present, much less the future. Yeah, in this film, the past is plenitude, the present is loss, which I think is kind of, an extremely kind of conservative way, and narrow and dystopian way of looking at things. Kind of, so for example, in this sense, you can imagine this village that has lost the pub, that has a food bank or whatever, but that has all other kinds of things going on in the village. Yeah,
I think what's worse than that as well is that, Bait thematically was treading very much the same ground as this in that respect. And we disagreed kind of with the politics in Bait. We were sort of saying, on the larger scale, this is how Brexit is. It's people lamenting the loss of something they really value, whether it's kind of real or not. But, and on the kind of the nationwide scale, it's easy to see through that. But then when you get to a local level, and Cornish independence and Cornwall has a kind of it's very much got this kind of about it. Then you go, it's something to be respected. Local things should be respected. Local things should be preserved. And I was kind of thinking to myself, like, at what point, if we respect it when it's small and disrespect it when it's large, at what point does it change? In that scaling, like it kind of felt the same. So we were saying this is a microcosm of a kind of Brexit attitude, and it wasn't actually, or wasn't something that we necessarily agreed with, but it was something that the film evoked very richly. You understood it completely.
Yes.
You understood the main character who felt this way. You understood his rage, all this kind of stuff. Here, it's so... Maybe this is a little harsh, but the word that comes to mind is tokenistic. It's done through symbols, it's done through tropes, and you don't really feel it. You know, the film is giving you this story about a comparison between the past and the present, and it shows you how good things were and how bad they are in the present by, you know, the shop changes from a post office to a food bank, the pub used to be busy and have activity and life, and now it's empty and there's no one there, no one's got any money. Anyway, it shows this, but it's so simple, and it's not really telling you anything or making you feel anything very deep. I found it really basic. Like I say, this is territory that Mark Jenkin has trodden before, much more successfully, much more evocatively. It's really basic here, and it doesn't really. It doesn't do much.
My most damning thought is that it seems very carefully thought through, but to very little effect. So, for example, you realize that at the beginning of the film, you know, that woman gives him £10 at the pub. Mm-hmm. And later on, in the film, you realize that like 30 years later, this character played by Callum Turner gives her, the younger version of her, his wage packet, and she gives him £10. So obviously, there's some connection that's being made between the £10 earlier and the £10 later. But what? Right? Yeah. And then, you know, the same thing with the hat. Yeah. The girl who in the present he kisses and flirts with in the pub, gives him this hat. And then it turns out that girl will be the daughter of the character played by Callum Turner. Right? Exactly. So, but... And? Yeah. Yeah? Kind of, you know. So... And that, to me, is a very damning critique, right? Or, you know, or you could argue, maybe I'm not making enough connections. Maybe I don't get the film, right? Or, but, kind of, I'm getting the film enough to be able to make the connections between those things. But what is the significance of those connections?
To make something of them and understand what the film is trying to make of them. I agree. I also think the film suffers from a real lack of narrative drive. Once you get into the space in which the one character is very happy with this, the other character is not, we just wind up in a situation in which they continue to go out on fishing trips. He continues to kind of have... The film blurs these lines in a reasonably effective way, I suppose, between kind of reality and something else, maybe. So, you know, like you'll have a passage of action. You know, stuff happens in the town. He is confused about what's going on, goes on a fishing trip, and things get slightly weirder and weirder and weirder very gradually until things are so weird that they start to become quite surreal. And then he jolts awake on the boat, and you're like, at some point this became a dream, or at some point, or maybe he was always dreaming. The film has not been clear about when it's been moving and from reality into non-reality, if it has been. But and so at first I was kind of, I don't know, iffy about that, and then I thought, this is the kind of space in which the film's taking me. I don't really mind that it's doing this. But anyway, we're in this kind of mode of storytelling for a little while, and nothing actually moves in the plot or in the character, really. No. Like, there's kind of stasis for a good portion of the latter half of the film, in which I'm thinking, well, something ought to change. Like, there should be a change in how they respond to the situation, or things that they try to do to get out of it, that kind of thing. Nothing actually happens of that sort. It's just that at the end, he then decides to accept his lot. But you kind of feel it hasn't been inevitably moving there, you know.
No. And also, I have questions. So, for example, what happens with the George Mackay character and his wife and his daughter? Yes, I mean, they're an anchor in the film. Yeah, he loves them. He goes to sea only because the roof has fallen down and he needs the money. What happens to them at the end? Yeah, he sends the letter and the money, but then he receives it, so he gives it to the parents of the character he now is in this past, which is someone else. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I suppose the action that he takes, isn't it, is that he joins the boat, because I think he's the representation, I suppose, is the only way to put it, of the character of the fisherman who didn't join the boat, left them shorthanded, and then killed himself in guilt. And so he chooses not to do that. And at the end, you see them go out with a full crew of 3, as they normally have been, instead of being left shorthanded. So that's the decision he makes. He says, I'm staying here, I'm part of this, I'm not going to let that happen. And that's where the film ends. So it ends with his choice, but you're right, like, what is the ultimate...
why does he take responsibility for that? It's another person, because actually one of the things that the film says, he was born 3 years after that happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So kind of... Yeah. Anyway, so I'm sure it's deliberately open-ended and poetic and so on. And I'm not asking for kind of, a traditional linear Hollywood style narrative where, everything important is repeated 3 times. But actually, I think it's just not very good storytelling.
No, I mean, I think it should be emotionally legible. Like, it needs to be what the character is going through and the way in which he came to that decision, or what the decision means to him, needs to be much more transparent emotionally. Needs to make much more sense in that respect. Like, he doesn't have to understand how this time skip happened. He doesn't have to understand how he went back in time or how we might get out of it. There's no explanation of that. The film doesn't owe us one. It's just the way that the film... that's the premise. But when the character makes his decisions based on the situation he finds himself in and what he understands of his situation, you have to feel it much more than you do.
Yeah.
And you just don't.
And I think for many reasons. So first of all, this George Mackay is the hero of our story. Yeah, we need to find him emotionally legible. Yeah, kind of, what is his connection to what happened in the past? Why is he taking on this burden? Yeah, why does he mean that, the 2 people that he loves, the film gives up on at the end, right? Like, kind of, he's our protagonist. We need to understand his inner life. I didn't, right? And, part of it is the storytelling. Part of it is the direction of actors, which I think they are all uniformly badly directed. Or if that direction is going for a particular style, it's a style that works against the film because it ends up stiff and stilted. But also, if you think of George Mackay, whom I've liked very much in other things, but in this film, he seems to have one expression. He's so sullen and dour and kind of angry looking or sad, right? Like, and that's our hero, right? Yeah. So it's interesting because actually whenever Callum comes into the picture, he seems natural and alive and sexy. And I mean, still mysterious. You actually don't know what happened to him previously, but you at least have a sense of what he's feeling at any moment, right? But he's the secondary part. Yeah, the protagonist is an angry, sullen presence. Angry is even the wrong word.
He's kind of worried, concerned, and confused.
Sullen.
But I think George Mackay might just not be a very good actor.
Well,
I've seen him in 2 things before. The one thing that immediately came to mind was 1917, which I don't remember liking him very much in that. I thought he was a bit of a blank at the centre of all that. Again, he's the protagonist. We're following him through, but I found him quite blank. And then just looking at his Wikipedia page, of course, he was in Pride, and he was again the main character in that, and the most forgettable part of that film. I don't think he's very good.
Well, that could be, though. I've seen both of those films, and I don't remember having a problem with him. Right. Whereas in this one, I really do.
Yeah. But I think he's at the very least not being asked to do much here, as you say. He's got one expression. He's got one thing to do. Every shot, and this is not just of him. This is the way the film works in general. Is a shot that conveys one piece of information, and then you cut to something else. And the information that's conveyed when you're looking at him is there's his face. He looks worried and confused as usual.
And actually, there is this kind of drier style. You know how in Joan of Arc, right, it's like everything's filmed from below. Yes. And there's a lot of filming from below in this film on faces, right? On faces often just turning.
I mean, it really does. It does have that Kuleshov effect. Like it's a student filmmaker or an experiment of like, here's how editing works. Well, that's great. Like you can use this in a classroom, I suppose, but it's it's not complex. It's not having a great effect. It's not very interesting filmmaking.
I mean, I think there are some shots in the film where I found myself, what is it doing here, right? You know, so, and because it's often also in close-ups, right? You know, so you have, I don't know, part of the pier and there's water falling, or and you think, okay, is this meant to be like a rhythm of life or the rhythm of a place, or which to me, you know, is quite interesting. I mean, I love experimental cinema, right? So if that's what the film is about, you know, the rhythm of a life in a place 30 years before versus now, I don't think it's conveying that very well, right? So I kind of, you know, and I think he is an interesting director, and I love, you know, that he seems to mine the Cornish culture, right? But I also think if that is the specialism, the life or stories or history that he's mining, is very one note. Right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think if this was the first one of his that I'd seen and I hadn't seen Bait before, I think I probably would remark on the kind of things you're talking about, the focus on landscape, on details of landscape. As you say, a lot of it is close up, and it's close up not just of faces, but of body parts and of machinery and of elements of the landscape. And you know, that stuff feels really, really tactile. And you do feel the kind of, and actually the sound design complements this as well. You know, it's quite rich, kind of clunky, crisp sound design, machinery moving, boats whirring, that kind of stuff. You do feel that, but I was familiar with that from Bait, right? He was doing that there, and probably more effectively there. I remember comparing Bait to Eraserhead, which has that real, because of that mechanical feel of the sound. So, you know, like, I'm fair to say that people probably would respond to that here. I think I responded to it less because I was already acclimatized to expecting that from having seen Bait. It is here, though.
What we see here that we didn't see in Bait is the uses of color.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, you know, at times incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You know, to look at. I
mean, the red roses that are left on the cliffside really punch. You know,
the yellow of the fishermen's outfits. You know, sometimes against the blue sky. I mean,
the different hues of the sea that you see from above. You know, like some is more lighter and green, and it's darker and bluer in the same shots. Yeah,
he's got a real eye for composition and color. Well, aesthetics in general. To me, it's like he is a visual artist, right? But you know, cinema is not just about visual art. It is, and particularly this type of narrative cinema. What I think he lacks skills at is really storytelling, and particularly also the direction of actors. I mean, it's really clunky, and it's not the actor's fault. Because all of them, get into this groove, and I think the only one that escapes it a little bit to me is Callum Best.
Callum Turner.
Turner, sorry.
Yeah, I think so. I must say I did enjoy the captain. I think it's probably fair to say he's one note, or
it's such a cliche character.
It is. It's a cliche. It's a trope. Absolutely, but it is quite a fun one. This kind of man of the sea, who his catchphrase is "home to mother" when they finish a thing.
But it should be more fun. If that's the point of it, then it should be funnier and full of jokes. If you live through the cliche to its fullest or something. I just thought it wasn't funny enough, and it wasn't charming enough. I mean,
I'd go with that as well. But I think he's worth a little bit of a mention.
Sure.
Francis McGee is the actor who plays him. So yeah, I mean, I find this a little bit of a disappointment because at least with Bates, we had lots of things to disagree with the film on. The film has an outlook, and we disagree with it, but it's very clear about what that outlook is, and it's very evocative in how it expresses it, and there's a lot to bite onto in that film. This is really plain in comparison.
It is. I kind of, and it kind, I don't know. I think when I became a critic very young, I made it a deliberate point. I don't want to know the filmmakers, right? Like, you know, I don't want to go to the parties. I don't want to be like part of the gang, because you feel beholden to them in some way. You do, inherently, even against your conscious wishes, respond differently to a work if you know the people involved, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's some kind of collective delusion. I mean, I'm really surprised that this film has been as well reviewed as it has. I mean, you know, I read like 4 reviews after we saw the film, just while I was making the coffee, you know, and they're all raves. Yeah, and I think either I'm mad, or there's a kind of a collective, there's some stake in this filmmaker in British culture. British culture has some kind of stake in the development of this particular filmmaker that is blinding it to the faults that we so clearly experienced or saw.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a film and a type of filmmaking that sort of tells its own story behind the scenes and has its own sense of importance behind the scenes. You know, this was made with this kind of camera on this kind of budget, telling a story about this kind of part of the world, and all that kind of stuff is like it conveys its own sense of importance or significance. You know, the kind of thing that we should be supporting, that we should be saying is great, regardless of what we actually think of it.
Yeah, but it's not truly poetic, or significant, you know, in the way that like Humphrey Jennings' films were, you know, which I think are beautiful poetry, or the way that Jarman's films were, or I now forget the name of the film and the filmmaker, but you know, that Scottish filmmaker who did an autobiographical, I think it's 4 films, which are very kind of also narratively expansive. I think it's Bill Douglas. Look up the Bill Douglas trilogy, because I think it began as 3 films.
Yeah, Bill Douglas. My Childhood, My Own Folk, My Way Home.
Yes. So those films, you know, have a loose narrative, but they're beautiful, they're poetic. Yeah, they kind of evoke a particular time and place incredibly well. You know, particularly the early films set in Scotland. It's gorgeous. I don't think this film operates at that level at all.
No. But it's supported by the BFI, and it's very much, you know, the kind of thing we should be supporting about British film culture.
And we want to support it.
Yeah. But it's also, you've got to be honest about how good it is. This wasn't that great.
I think it wasn't that great. So on that note, we're eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, and YouTube Music. On social media, we're on Facebook, Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, Blue Sky, eavesdropping.bsky.social, Instagram, Eavesdropping at the Movies, I think. And the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Bye-bye.